welcome to the Courage for Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Jason McDonald, and we're here on a wonderful Saturday afternoon with Kelly Tallon Franklin. How are you doing today, Kelly?
I'm alive and well.
That's good to hear. Okay, so today, actually this week, we got some exciting news from the Ontario government. They're going to be applying some new policies and ideas to the existing youth care system. And maybe can you explain a little bit about what this means for at-risk youth?
So this is a huge win for the province of Ontario and probably precedent setting for other provinces that have struggled along just in their capacity to protect and support kids and youth at risk for human trafficking and sexual exploitation. We have had good laws, and then we've had laws and legislation that were good for other reasons. But when it came to the protection of our kids and just the capacity for police officers to lay charges and for Children's Aid to ensure kids were being looked after, it wasn't a very good deal. It wasn't good at all. And for all those that have been survivors and NGOs, agencies that have been doing the work and seeing the increase to over 68% of all trafficking being age 24 and down, and a huge number of that being the 16, 17, 18 age, we were losing the battle. And police were frustrated, child protection agencies were frustrated, families were frustrated because we couldn't protect kids the way that we knew we needed to be when it came specifically to this issue. Yeah, it was big.
Yeah, and
So there's all kinds of cheering, but then you know me, Jason, it's like, okay, so where's the next gap?
right. You know, definitely, it's good that you're taking that approach to these types of things because youth, especially in Canada, it's definitely a problem that a lot of people don't seem to notice, and especially in southwestern Ontario. I remember, the city of London specifically was commissioning studies and all sorts of papers to kind of find out what their youth problem was like only a couple of years ago. So it seems like, this is something that was long overdue to kind of at least try something different. But yeah,
Well, you know what, Jason, that's a really good point because people started the conversations, but still we're going, and this is why this new legislation being put forward is so important, that we would have conversations with youth and we'd be talking to families. And even so, the language we'd use around human trafficking and sexual exploitation, they'd have no clue what we were talking about. And still to this day, using that language to try to message this out and reach youth, we're not speaking the right language. And so it's the adults that need to change on this, and the adults that needed to change legislature. One of the components was that police will be able to act when they believe a youth is manipulated, exploited, or coerced, if the youth doesn't have the capacity to understand that's what's happening to them. And so often when police have been working with young people and they're encouraging young people that there's safety available or they can make a decision, the young people have no idea what's even happening to them. So expecting them to be the ones to respond, cooperate with police, and lay a charge was ridiculous in our regard anyways. So that's the whole thing. If you really read through the document and actually read through the whole legislature, it also means that if a youth, has been forced drugged and now is suffering with addiction or substance abuse and doesn't have the capacity to understand what's happening to them, again, police and child protection can do something. But where we're landing is the same place that you and I usually do in conversation, and that is, so what are we going to do with these young people now?
Right.
So police do have the capacity now to lay charges or to execute and be able to support these young people with, a custody order or a return order or whatever. And they have greater power for prosecution against somebody um, that is pervasively, recruiting young people that are in the child welfare system, things like that, like just some really nitty gritties that we have been, hoping for. I didn't think we'd see legislation around this issue this fast. This is a huge win, but now it's just created, another problem. And the problem is now that the police have the power and children's services has the power, once these young people they're able to execute on these things, where do we put them?
Right.
Have we created more safe houses? Have we created more spaces for them that are not in a group home setting
Mhm.
where they're not going to get the individual care they need for this issue? Have we provided more safe houses in communities where only 3 to 5 young people will be in that house? Because that's about all that should be managed when you're caring for PTSD induced trauma and dealing with the entrenchment issues and all the secondary issues. This is huge. We shouldn't be sticking them in hotels. We
Mhm.
shouldn't be sticking them into a space that they're just going to want to run from over and over again. They have trauma bonds, and these trauma bonds to the persons that have exploited, recruited, and coerced them are psychological bonds that take years to break. And they will be working on this stuff the rest of their life. If we don't have the places that are appropriate, then we'll just be warehousing kids and they'll be returning and the cycle will get worse. And you know me, Jason, my deal is the hole in the bucket needs to get smaller that our kids are slipping through. And it's an all hands on deck, and it's always about listening to survivors and what their needs are. So, hooray, had a great call with the Solicitor General, Sylvia Jones, on call with our police chiefs and my MPP, Jeff Urich, who constantly his office and his phone is open to this issue, even though he's now Minister of Environment. He still is responsible to his constituents. So talking to Minister Jones, I know that in the back of this, that the Ontario strategy is still rolling out. So we still are going to see some other things come forward. And I know what's being advocated for, that there's standardized screening, that we're going to have other safe spaces, that training is going to be more consistent and available, and just some great things. I know that the government's working on them because they were part of the stakeholders meetings for the strategy.
And
We're hopeful.
that's good, and it's good to have a win once in a while, and there are particularly a couple in the month of March now that of things that we're looking forward towards, and one of those is International Women's Day, and from what I understand, Courage for Freedom is uh, perhaps going to have a little bit of a special role in this year's celebrations.
So we have International Women's Day falls around my birthday.
Hmm.
So there's a whole bunch of things that kind of happen around this. I'm kind of silly at this age and stage in my life. And, I'm old as dirt, so I can get away with a little more. So I kind of stretch my birthday into a month-long affair. And so I use it to fundraise for deserving girls that we are able to provide care and resources and basic needs for. We are not government funded.
Hmm.
So everything we do, we have to raise the money for. So there's my shameless pitch that on my Facebook, there is a fundraise, and I think you'll be able to share it at the end, that if you want to give a tax receivable donation, it will go directly to a girl. It's not going to my cake or a bottle of wine. The other thing is the International Women's Day kind of turns into a week-long thing where Those that have a story, like I do as a survivor, and have resiliency and, lead the charge on things to be disruptors and demand change that are, around equity, diversity, inclusion, and safety and protection of women and girls. We're in high demand. So we get booked all over. So that I actually yesterday I spoke to over 50 students and staff at a school in Calgary, Alberta, and just encouraged them to learn what being a good disruptor looks like in their days ahead. Yeah, you're smiling at me, Jason.
Oh, I like that. It's that good trouble kind of mentality is
Well,
awesome.
yeah, I'm kind of trouble with a capital T. So learning to use that is all part of my story. I have a criminal past and I've got a drug addiction past and a very tumultuous past. And learning that all those things that I was executing inappropriately in my life were actually gift, skills, and talents that resided inside of me that had a purpose and I just hadn't found it. That's one of the reasons I can intersect with young girls and have these conversations quite candidly to encourage them that the very thing that they think was negative and to destroy them, we can move that across the other side of the asset line and now start helping them to self direct their thinking and their care. So I speak about that a lot. And then we also are heading into the UN CSW 65 meetings that 2 years ago attended personally in New York with business and professional women as their ad hoc chair internationally and for Canada in this issue. This year, my co-lead on the national task force, Heather Ellis, and I, along with our research lead lawyer, Ashley Boyce, we're headed to the UN. And on March 20th, we will be providing a parallel event and people can jump on. And we're going to be talking about the shadow pandemic to women and girls, specifically around human trafficking and sexual exploitation and how we're just failing what we're failing. We're report carding ourselves and then we're going to encourage people. You know me, Jason, I'll give people something to do at the backside. So we're going to be speaking and it's a humbling opportunity. We go with amplified voices of the young girls that are in our groups and we see through our organization, and we carry the message of hope and of action. And that's why we started, a task force with Project Maple Leaf.
Right. And just to touch on something that you mentioned there, I think it's important for people to maybe hear and understand this a little bit. You yourself as a survivor are going and speaking on behalf of other survivors and doing all of this great work. But you do find yourself in positions that are quite stressful just for anyone in general. How do you manage speaking at the United Nations in New York while also dealing with trauma that has happened to you in the past?
Well, sometimes you just gotta, put your big girl clothing on and have at it. But I think I'm really candid when I talk to people, and I think sometimes it makes people grossly uncomfortable at the level of truth that I share. Even having a conversation with you before we go on air to let you know that some of the ways that I manage speaking, people don't know that I don't like speaking. And they don't understand that the reason I talk incessantly is I overtalk because of my anxiety about speaking, that my PTSD actually gets in my head before I talk. And sometimes right in the middle, my chest will tighten up and I start to have a panic attack and I have to talk myself out of it so I don't pick up a puffer. Um, a lot of times before I speak in person, I throw up. So I always, if you see me chewing gum just before I'm speaking, you know where I was. And sometimes with my PTSD, if I don't kind of clear a space before I'm talking, I'll blank. And I blanked at the UN. The first year I was there, and I was sitting beside members of federal parliament and beside Mary Lou McFerrin, who's a senator, sitting in between them with my knees knocking, not even understanding how I got into the meeting that I was in, and had an opportunity to say something briefly. And somebody across the room was speaking from another country, and they were talking about trauma and how trauma affects people differently from different countries as women and girls, but it's still the same. And she was talking, she was from a Middle Eastern country, and she was talking about how, as one of the girls that was taken into camp where there was war, her job was to do whatever she was told in order to save her life. And one of the things they did is they went out on hunting expeditions, and they would have to bleed out and look after any of the whatever the type of deer are in their community, and how she just can't eat meat and has a problem with blood. Well, in that moment, here I am 50 years old, and I thought that most of my trauma had been dealt with. And all of a sudden, one of the things that always bothered me is, why didn't I speak up when I was younger? And I had a vision, and it took me back to my garage when I was 5. And in our garage, there was a deer hung that was shot by my dad. And when my job was to go with my dad, we hunted, we ate the meat, registered gun owner, the whole 9 yards, nothing weird. And he would pull the rope for the deer. And when he'd pull it, the exhaust and the air in its body would go through its vocal cords, and it would cry. And it really bothered me. And here I am at the UN in a full vision in my head, and I'm gone. Like, I'm not there. That's what trauma can do. And I saw in that moment my dad slit the deer's throat to bleed it out. I'm the one that's holding the bucket, and him looking at me and saying, "See how easy it is to make something be quiet." And in that trauma moment at the UN, like that, I came back out of it, and I now had my answer why I never spoke up. Because I had a 5-year-old interpretation and perception about being silenced. And it's funny how much it related to the girl across the floor in the UN sharing her story of silence. Then it's my turn to speak briefly. And even worse, I think you thought this was funny. Red means talk and green means stop. Well, you know how I mucked that up. But laughing and having camaraderie of men and women that are moving forward with equity and protection and really caring about issues, and developing some of those lifelong relationships that I now have with people all over the globe that think this work is important. And each and every person, whether it's a grassroots person or meeting a prime minister or a president from another country, um, I've learned that it's okay to own my trauma too. I don't have to live in it. So actually 2021, Jason, talking to you, be more vocal. I really don't care what people think, except what they think about their capacity to join in this fight. And I care what the girls and the women that I serve and their families in this issue, I care what they think. Because listening to survivors as a survivor myself was key. I had to listen to myself first. And so some days I'll be ridiculously inappropriate and start talking to a government official about how their kids are, or ask where they go on holidays, or it's just the way I deal with trauma. And I've learned that that's okay. But I've also learned it's never going to go away. And there's even worse, dealing with a lot of the young girls that I'm responsible to support in their self-directed care. Holidays are really crappy for trauma survivors. Special days are horrible.
Are these, you mentioned that in a lot of ways, though, that these days do also bring together like networks of support that can help survivors. Is there, I guess, a silver lining, and although we are kind of like revisiting some of the worst things that have ever happened in people's lives,
Yeah.
how have these events helped you kind of like find other people that have similar experiences and bond over those things?
Yes, exactly. It does. It to find networks of people that are able to share without feeling like you're going to get trolled or doxxed over it is important. In in any kind of trauma, there are bonds emotionally, mentally, physically, even spiritually that you have to learn to navigate through. And finding a community of people that you can trust that might have shared lived experience is important. But one of the things I think has been really important is in the past, a lot of trauma survivors, we have been put in a place to glamorize or valorize our trauma. There's a difference between glamorizing and valorizing trauma to get the best National Enquirer story and sharing it honestly for people's capacity and understanding in what it takes for somebody with lived experience just to get up every day, get in a shower, get through a day, have conversations, and try to live as normal a life as possible. It's never normal. It's always PTSD overcoming every day. So having a camaraderie of people that get you, but I find that I told you I'm old as dirt, right? Misery loves company. That is a very old phrase. And if I am just commiserating every day on how difficult this is and how much I have to overcome, I am leading out of my trauma instead of getting out of my trauma. So, one of the decisions, the board, the National Task Force, myself, we just think it's a new day with all the things that are happening, the National Awareness Day being announced. That's something I had to step away from that announcement for 48 hours because I couldn't talk. And it just hit me so hard what had been accomplished by everybody's alliances and work that I didn't think in my lifetime I thought that would happen either. So I have made a conscious decision, along with support of my board and allies and good friends and a national task force, that we're going to lead out of our courage because it takes courage to deal with your trauma every day. And it takes courage for people that don't have lived experience to align themselves and say, we are going to stand against this issue. We're going to take an eradicate challenge. We're going to join a movement, even though there might be bits and pieces we don't fully agree with. We agree with the principle of it. And there's major things that we need to do together. And when we're courageous, you know how much courage it took to use the word eradicate? Because right away, there's people going, oh, you'll never reach that goal. Well, not if you're on my team, first. And second, we're never even going to come close if we never try. And I think, I can't remember who it is. I think it's Rotary International. And you might have to look this up and correct me later with a disclaimer, but I believe it was Rotary that came up with the campaign to eradicate polio. And they have worked generationally on this issue. And it was watching their work and their tenacity to go after it. And now seeing, I think polio is less than 1% globally, that they worked to come that close, as close as they could to the line, is what inspired me to borrow their phrase. So leading out of our courage instead of trauma for survivors to be supporting each other instead of commiserating. Because commiserating, you can, but you have to jump off of it really quick or it becomes your real estate. I want to go to an Airbnb and think about commiserating, and then I don't want that to be my permanent real estate in my head or my work.
I think that that's great that you can share that and that people can get to hear this, you know, and it's honestly, it's powerful for me to hear these things, like just to, as an individual, hearing like what this movement is really about is, you know, it's a wonderful exploration. I think, you know, it's something that you learn a little bit, you learn something new a little bit about something that I guess you're familiar with every day. And yeah, no, it's just it's really great to hear those types of things. And yeah, I want to go back to something that we were talking about your birthday. And
Uh, we've had 3 on air now. I'm 3 years older because you've mentioned it 3 times,
right,
Chase.
but I wanna tie this back into it, right? And
Yeah.
for people who are listening, you know, and we're talking about a fundraiser, which, you know, necessary, like it's not just you know, sometimes these things can get lost in translation, the importance of what it actually means to give money to Courage for Freedom, you know, and it's what you talked about, you know, you're giving money not just to like some nameless, faceless person that is whatever, not like that you're never going to meet. It's someone who could end up being, you know, the next Kelly Tallon Franklin, right? Like these are people that, you know, if they get a chance, if
Yeah.
we give them a chance, then, you know, we don't know what wonderful things they're capable of until we try. So
No, and I think that's important, that this might be faceless for anybody who's listening. And we have own it's never going to happen to me syndrome. But we have to remember that where it's happening is when a child is on a bus to go to school, it's on their screen. They could be being coerced, manipulated, or exploited. And, we're not here to scare the bejesus out of anybody. Let's use common and sense together in a sentence. But if we start to think that we have not even created a society where it's okay to talk about this without somebody feeling ashamed. And the level of shame for a parent to have to say, my child was trafficked, they're not going to say it very rarely. And those that do and are parents of survivors, there's a lot of vicarious trauma that rests on them, and they are ashamed and they're angry. And we can't put ourselves in those shoes unless. So, the best thing to do is to prevent it. And what I tell people is it's like car insurance. You hope you never use it. So, yeah, it might not be happening to you. And maybe it's not happening to any of your neighbors, but how the hell would you know? Have you had the conversation to make it apparent to them that you wouldn't make them feel ashamed? That you wouldn't have the compassionate conversation with them in their face, and then behind them at church or at the water cooler at work, you're, guess what? Did you hear? How does that help? How does it help around any issue? But specifically this issue, because it's linked with sexual commodification and body crime against someone's body and spirit and mind and future, there is a lot of blame. And so we just look at it this way: help us do our job because you can't. It's like when we're on the farm and we're working with girls with horses for therapy. You're not going to come and muck a stall. If you're a corporate or you're a parent, that's not what you're going to do. We're not asking you to come and shovel shit. We're asking you to financially put the boots on, to financially be there, to make us available in the blink of an eye when somebody needs support. And it's not just us, it's all agencies and all locations. It's all hands on deck. And we take a lot of girls that might have cycled through other places and it hasn't worked for them. We're kind of sometimes that place that never gives up. We jokingly say we're the island of misfit toys from the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer movie. And that's kind of how our task force is and our board. We looked for the gaps. We didn't want to do what everybody else was doing. We wanted to create a new path where there wasn't one. And sometimes that's harder. And we don't have government funding for it, but we add more water to the soup and we tend to reach a lot of young people that otherwise would cycle back in or get buried in mental health or addiction problems that are outlying because of what happened to them. It's important. Tomorrow for my birthday, before I leave to go anywhere, I'm going to pick up a girl from a treatment center to put her in a safe house. It's just the way my life goes. And it's an honor to do it and to share that with her without making her feel guilty that she mattered to me on my birthday. And there's a lot of birthdays that I couldn't do anything because I had that trauma issue, or thinking of Father's Day or Christmases. I I say to the staff and the volunteers that I work with, Christmas is not a time for us to be off. You can be off 2 weeks previous to Christmas break. And my husband knows we are off Christmas Day, basically New Year's Day, but I'm still on deck those days. Because if you think about a young person, Jason, that's gone to get help and they finally build a level of trust with a worker or support, whether it's a police officer, or victim services, or somebody through children's services, and all great agencies, organizations doing incredible work. And people do deserve holidays. But when do you think trauma about isolation and breaches in family and feeling like you made your family ashamed and that your life is a mess, when do you think it would hit you? Holidays. And so Christmas is a really hard date. And that is not the time that one of the young girls or women that we're working with should get a phone call, should get an answering machine on a phone call that says, I'm sorry, I'm off for 2 weeks holidays. Please call the office and an attending worker will help you. So we just always feel like we have to find the gaps and we have to fund those gaps. And to the best of our ability, we're just like the little engine that could. For those that are over here on my whiteboard, we have to treat them like more than a number or a client, because part of the reason that they do well is we help them to learn to self-direct relationships. That is a key. Relationships aren't 8 to 4, 9 to 5. Can you imagine marrying somebody and say 9 to 5, I'm available, and then I'm off the radar? Have at it. Doesn't work.
Well, yeah, again, no, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, so this is, it's a special time, or well, when we're talking about these days, it's good to reflect on these things. And like you're talking about with your birthday coming up, that's people don't really understand, I guess, the work that goes into these types of things. Yeah, no, this has been a good conversation, and I'm glad that we got to talk today. We're kind of out of time here, but I just want to, say that we'll definitely link everything that we've talked about in the discussion today. And Kelly, I want to thank you again for sharing everything that we've talked about today. And I hope to have more conversations like this in the future, because it really brings out the good, the bad, and the real side of this story. So thank you for coming on today.
Thank you, Jason, for being so professional in how your approach is to our podcast. And we just want to let people know there are all kinds of people that will be coming on with you in the future. We're just filling in that schedule. It's going to get exciting.
All right. Well, that's, things to look forward to in the future. All right. Well, thank you very much, Kelly, and I'll see you later.